The Italian Mafia thought they could simply eliminate the king of Harlem, Bumpy Johnson. They learned a brutal lesson when their elite assassins were returned not with a message, but as the message. New York City in the old days was ruled by dangerous men. The Italian Mafia was the biggest and the worst. They had a famous boss named Lucky Luciano. He was a smart and quiet man who changed how crime worked. He made the Mafia into a giant business. His men owned the police. They owned the judges. They controlled the ships, the trucks, and the streets. The Mafia bosses looked at New York City and believed they owned the whole world. But there was one place they did not own. That place was Harlem. Harlem was filled with money. The money came from something called the numbers game. It was a street lottery. The poor people played with pennies and dimes. They hoped to win a few dollars to feed their families. But millions of people played every single day. Those pennies and dimes piled up. They turned into millions of dollars in cold, hard cash. The Italian Mafia looked at Harlem, and their mouths watered. They wanted that cash. They did not want to share it. They thought the black gangsters in Harlem were weak. They thought they could just walk in and take the money. They were very wrong. Standing in their way was a man who knew no fear. His name was Ellsworth Johnson. Everyone called him Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson was not a normal street thug. He was a very smart man. He read books by famous writers. He played chess and studied war. But Bumpy was also a cold and deadly fighter. He always carried a knife. He knew how to use a gun. And he had just fought a terrible, bloody war against a crazy mobster named Dutch Schultz. Bumpy won that war. He kept Harlem safe. The people of Harlem loved Bumpy. He paid rent for families who had no money. He bought food for hungry kids. In return, the people protected him. The whole neighborhood was his alarm system. The shoeshine boys, the waitresses, the taxi drivers, and the street sweepers all worked for Bumpy. They were his eyes and ears. The Italian Mafia bosses did not understand this. They held a secret meeting downtown. They said it was time to kill Bumpy Johnson. They did not want to start a loud street war. That is bad for business. Instead, they decided to send their best killers, elite hitmen. These were men who never missed. They were ghosts. The plan was simple. Go to Harlem, shoot Bumpy in the head, and walk away. And with Bumpy dead, the Mafia would step in and take all the millions from the numbers game. The hitmen took the train up to Harlem. They wore very nice suits. They carried heavy guns under their coats. They were arrogant. They thought they were hunting a normal man. They did not know they were stepping into a giant web, and Bumpy Johnson was the spider. The very second those hitmen walked into Harlem, Bumpy knew they were there. A young boy saw them walking. A man sweeping the floor noticed their nice suits. They looked out of place. The word traveled fast. Within minutes, someone whispered in Bumpy's ear. They told him the Italians were here to kill him. A weak boss would have run away. A weak boss would have called the police or hidden in a safe house. Bumpy Johnson smiled. He loved to play chess, and the Italian Mafia had just made a very stupid move. Bumpy told his men to get ready. The hitmen spent a few days watching Bumpy. They learned where he ate. They learned where he slept. They picked a dark, rainy night to kill him. Bumpy was inside a local club. The hitmen stood outside in a dark alley across the street. They hid in the shadows. They held their guns tightly. They waited for Bumpy to walk out the door. They thought they were invisible. But the street was too quiet. Normally, Harlem was loud at night. But tonight, no dogs were barking. No one was laughing. The street was dead silent. The hitmen felt a cold chill. Something was very wrong. Before they could turn around, the shadows behind them moved. Bumpy's men did not use guns. Guns are too loud and bring the police. They used heavy metal pipes. When they used thick wooden clubs, it was over in 5 seconds. The elite Italian killers were hit hard in the back of the head. They dropped to the ground, fast asleep. Bumpy's men dragged their heavy bodies into the back of a dark truck. They locked the doors and drove away. No one screamed. No police came. When the lead hitman opened his eyes, he was in a nightmare. His head was bleeding. The air was cold. He smelled rust and old meat. He was tied to a heavy wooden chair. The ropes were tied so tight they cut into his skin. He was inside a dark meat warehouse. He could not see his friends. He was all alone. He heard slow footsteps coming from the dark. Bumpy Johnson walked into the light. He looked perfect. He wore a clean coat and a nice hat. He lit a cigarette. He did not yell. He did not look angry. He looked completely calm. And that made the hitman more scared than he had ever been in his life. The hitman tried to act tough. He spat blood on the floor. He told Bumpy he was making a huge mistake. He said, "If you kill me, the Italian Mafia will burn Harlem to the ground. They will send 100 more killers." Bumpy blew out a cloud of gray smoke. He looked at the hitman like he was a piece of garbage. Bumpy knew a secret about war. If he just shot this man, the Mafia would send more men next week. Bumpy needed to make them so scared that they would never come back. He needed to break their minds. Bumpy leaned in close. He spoke in a very soft voice. He told the hitman there would be no quick death. He told him there was no escape. Bumpy turned around and walked out of the light. He left the hitman with his best torturers. Like what happened next inside that freezing warehouse is a dark secret. But the stories that leaked out were horrible. Bumpy's men took a very long time. They made sure the hitman felt every single second of pain. They made him pay for disrespecting the king of Harlem. They did not just kill him. They took him apart. 3 days later, a plain truck drove to a private mafia club in Lower Manhattan. This was a place where Lucky Luciano's top men went to drink and relax. 2 unknown men carried a heavy wooden box out of the truck. They dropped it at the back door of the club. Then they drove away and vanished into the city. The next morning, 2 low-level mafia guards found the box. It was nailed shut. It had no name on it. It smelled like old blood and bad meat. The guards thought it was a box of illegal whiskey. They grabbed a heavy metal bar and popped the wood open. One guard looked inside and screamed. He fell backward onto the dirty ground. His face turned completely white. The scream was so loud that the other mafia men ran outside with their guns ready. They looked inside the box. They froze. It was the body of their best killer. But he was in pieces. He was folded up and stuffed inside the box like cheap meat. It was a horrible, bloody sight. But the scariest detail was right at the top of the pile. It was a piece of the killer's shirt. It was folded perfectly neat. There was no letter. There was no paper note. Bumpy Johnson did not need words. The message was loud and clear. If you send death to Harlem, it will come back to you in a box. Fear hit the Italian Mafia like a lightning bolt. The top bosses were called to the club, and these were men who ordered murders every day. But when they looked into that wooden box, they started shaking. The arrogance washed right off their faces. They finally understood. Bumpy Johnson was not a street thug playing games. The Mafia used violence to make money. But Bumpy Johnson used violence as a pure language. He was showing them exactly what would happen if they kept trying to steal his home. The Italian bosses realized a terrifying truth. If they kept fighting, Bumpy would not just stay in Harlem. He would bring the war to them. He would start putting the big bosses in boxes. It would cost the Mafia too much money and too much blood. The Mafia did something it rarely does. They backed down. They called Bumpy Johnson for a peace meeting. They did not demand anything. They asked him to talk as an equal, and they set up a quiet room. Nobody brought guns. Nobody brought bodyguards. Just the most powerful crime lords in New York City. When Bumpy walked into that room, he stood tall. He looked the Italian bosses right in their eyes. He had zero fear. They looked at the man who had mailed their best killer back in pieces. They respected him. More importantly, they feared him. They made a simple deal. Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson. He would run the numbers game. He would control the streets. The Italians would get a tiny cut of the money just to keep the peace. But they promised never to try to take over Harlem again. They promised never to send another hitman. The biggest, most dangerous crime family in America surrendered to one man. Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for the rest of his life. He lived a long time, he ate at nice restaurants, and he walked the streets without bodyguards. No one dared to touch him. He watched the Italian bosses get old. Some went to prison, some were shot by their own friends. Lucky Luciano was sent far away to Italy and died there. But Bumpy stayed the king. The story of the wooden box became a dark legend. It was a ghost story told in mafia clubs for years. Fathers told it to their sons. It taught every new gangster the most important rule of the New York streets. You can control the judges. You can buy the police. You can think you are the toughest man in the world. But you never, ever cross the king of Harlem. Because if you send bad men to Bumpy Johnson's door, he will not just kill them. He will pack them up, nail the lid shut, and mail them right back to you.